we have many programs in companies that help, let's say, younger parents with children at home. And we're talking about working mom type programs with flex time, paid time off, work from home before the pandemic, when that was actually something that was new and different. Even self-care programs, financial planning programs for retirement, coaching programs when people have trouble with alcoholism or any other kind of problem in the workplace. Most companies have these kinds of programs. What we are lacking in, and it's important to understand this, is that we're lacking in formal programs that support those who support aging loved ones.
If there's one thing we've learned from the pandemic, it's that even the best employees can struggle to keep up with both personal and work requirements. Companies have started to address things like childcare, mental health, and financial pressures that some of their employees are facing. Many have been expanding the support they provide employees, from more flexible hours to education benefits and other initiatives that consider a person's work-life balance. However, there's one area that seems to have slipped past even the keenest HR execs, and it's a big one. I'm Jane Singer, and thank you for joining me today on A Seat at the Table. Each week, I get to sit down with industry leaders, innovators, entrepreneurs, and authors who share their expertise, experience, and insights so that we can identify those steps that lead to greater success. Today, I'm speaking with Debbie Howard, a consultant and strategist, who says that what most companies overlook is the challenge of what she terms duty of care. She points to the often unplanned and unexpected challenges employees face when a loved one requires them to suddenly become a caregiver. The impact of this can be devastating. Companies who have programs in place to support their employees through these situations can have a life-changing impact, winning loyalty and contributing to social responsibility. In this podcast, Debbie will be discussing the challenges of becoming a caregiver, easy ways that companies can support caregiver employees by adapting programs that they might already have in place, and the benefits to companies of offering caregiver support programs as part of their HR initiative and compensation packages. Before we get started, don't forget to check out our website at seat.fm, where you can find the show notes and lots of other links that you might find useful. That's SEAT.FM, FM because it's a podcast. Now let's learn more about why it's critical to start addressing the needs of caregivers. Debbie, it's so great to have you on A Seat at the Table. I think the topics that you're focusing on are so relevant, and yet we don't really see anybody talking about it. And I really love the fact that one of your taglines, I don't know if it's a tagline, maybe I'm using the wrong phrasing on that, but you say, take a leadership role in your own life. And I thought, yeah, exactly. We never think about that, right? We think about the leadership role that we have in the workplace, but we never think about our life from that point of view. So perhaps we can start with you diving in and explaining how you see that and what we might do.
Well, thank you so much, Jane, for having me today. I've given this a lot of thought. First of all, I've been on the planet for quite a while. and I also had a few things happen along the way that forced me to look inside and try to think about what I was doing, what I wanted to do, how I was doing it,
right,
where I was going, how I wanted things to end up. And I think these are all really interesting and basic questions when we're running businesses as well. So we always want to think about where are we going, what are we doing, and how are we going to get there. I personally had my parents divorce when I was in my mid-teens, and that forced me to dig deep at a very young age. And I couldn't really quite fathom what was going on. It was all very confusing and upsetting, but I had to decide at an early age to make choices. And I believe that making choices is a really important part of running a business or running your life.
Right.
So I guess, can I tell you just a little bit about my background so you can
Yes.
sort of see the arc? So from let's say a divorced kid at 15 and a girl in the early 70s, I was part of the women's movement, if you will, or certainly I was inspired by it.
Right.
And I absolutely felt that I could do anything in terms of what I would do with my life. And I absolutely thought I would do something. I never thought I would be a homemaker. And I'm not denigrating that at all, but I absolutely had aspirations to be a business person. And so I set out on that as an early aspiration in my life and went to college. I was the first one in my family to finish college, and my mother helped me make sure that happened because we actually didn't have very much money because of the divorce, but my mom helped me apply for the loans and make sure that I got through school. And then I got my first job. I worked for about 10 years in a corporate environment in corporate communications. And then I was a little bored with my job in a corporation. And I set out on a gap year, if you will, at 31 years old. And I went on a trip around the world and never made it out of Japan.
Wow.
So I ended up living in Japan for a total of about 30 years, living and working there. And I worked for about 5 years for a large ad agency, McCann Erickson Hakuhodo, in market research. And then I started my own market research firm in 1989 and ran that for 24 years.
Wow.
And so I am a serial entrepreneur, and it's probably not unusual to imagine somebody who sees the need in their lives to be an entrepreneur or to be on their own or to do something with their lives. And I know that may sound a little funny, but certainly I'm a very driven person. So I always wanted to do something and something good. And I actually helped many, many large companies leverage their propositions in the Japanese market, which is by anybody's standards, the second or third largest consumer market in the world. And so I've worked for everyone who's anyone in the food business, fashion, luxury brands, even financial and medical products and healthcare products. So really across the gamut there, and lots of great, great experiences there in Japan. And then in 2007, my mom was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. And this will have happened to many of your listeners. And if it hasn't already, it will happen sooner or later, that
Right.
we are called as adults in mid-career to help our aging parents and loved ones move to the ends of their lives. And I literally had to leave my young team in Tokyo in charge of my business and go home to South Carolina, where I grew up, to help my mom because she couldn't live on her own anymore. And it was a really traumatic experience. I'm a marketing person and a market research person, and I don't know anything about nursing still. It was really, really difficult and challenging in so many ways, not just those nuts and bolts kind of ways, but also emotionally.
Yes, of course.
Emotional terrain was super difficult. And I found myself faced with another situation where I had to dig deep and try to gain some skills that I realized at the time I didn't have. So I did that and helped my mom. And then I used my market research skills to heal myself in a way by writing about it. So because I was a market researcher and am a market researcher, I'm a good business writer. And I thought it would be pretty easy, but it wasn't. Anyway, I researched it, wrote a book, and now not only am I a global market research strategist and consultant, but I am also a caregiver consultant. So I wanted to mention the arc of my story because it does have several acts, if you will,
Yes.
where I have had to reinvent myself at several points in my life. And I think this is also very important for businesses to reinvent themselves.
I think you're absolutely correct about that. And, we don't know what's coming next in life. And sometimes it's something that, like you said, you're not prepared for. And, you need to very quickly figure out how to tackle a particular situation. And particularly when it has an emotional component to it, it's not easy. It's you're really you're sort of fighting a war on two fronts, so to speak.
Exactly. That's so true, Jane. And I think I hate to mention the pandemic, but honestly, that has tested us all in so many new and different ways. And I've heard many of our clients in business just go, wow, I did not sign up to be managing that. The business side of things as well as the personal side of things is very, very challenging.
It really is. I mean, sort of out of the blue, right? People had to totally adapt the way they worked. And for some business, it was really a massive shift, right? For some people who were already doing most things online, it was an easier transition. But for other people, wow, all of a sudden you're scrambling, right? To reinvent the way you do things and how you manage people and how you keep people engaged and so on. So
yes,
in terms of your work as a consultant and strategist, advising companies, you were telling me about this before, working with companies to be able to be supportive of employees who have caregiving responsibilities. And I thought that was interesting because nobody really talks about that. We really only focus on employees who have new babies or younger kids. We don't really, it never comes on the radar that people have either elderly parents or relatives who need care, or someone who may not be elderly but still needs care, right, for some medical condition, or there's things that happen in life at all ages. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure, Jane. Thank you for asking. I think one of the interesting things about the pandemic is that it has made us all see the duty of care. So whether we're caring for young children at home or aging parents and loved ones, or both, some people care for both. We call them sandwich caregivers.
Right.
It doesn't matter. It's the duty of care. And when people need help, when your care receiver needs help, they need help. And so this is really something that has become so much more evident with the pandemic. We could some of it was hidden underneath a little bit before, but suddenly that became very, very evident. And it's really impacted companies. We have many programs in companies that help, let's say, younger parents with children at home. And we're talking about working mom type programs with flex time, paid time off, work from home before the pandemic, when that was actually something that was new and different. Even self-care programs, financial planning programs for retirement, coaching programs when people have trouble with alcoholism or any other kind of problem in the workplace. Most companies have these kinds of programs. What we are lacking in, and it's important to understand this, is that we're lacking in formal programs that support those who support aging loved ones. And we know statistically, and of course I'm a market researcher, so I always have to bring in the numbers, but we know that those who care for aging loved ones represent 30% of every workforce these days.
Wow.
And it was 20% before the pandemic, but now it's 30%. And I know your listeners will all I know your listeners will all have someone they know, either in the workplace or in their own families, who are struggling with this challenge. For example, many people who had their let's say maybe a parent or a loved one was in assisted living, they brought them home to live with them because of the pandemic in an abundance of caution to keep them safe. If the parent stayed in assisted living or needed to stay there, it became very difficult for the employee, in this case, to go visit their parent as they had before. So many people were isolated from their loved ones as well. So we had, and let's say you had an aging parent who was doing fine living independently, but now suddenly you're going to the grocery store for them so that you're the one taking the risk on getting a germ rather than your aging parents. So your responsibilities increased, even if your parents were okay and living independently. So there's been a lot of impact on that. And we can really, in my work, supporting aging caregivers or caregivers of aging people, the pandemic has really helped raise awareness of that. So companies can take the programs that they already offer to working moms and working parents and repurpose those to the needs of working caregivers. So we've got, for example, paid time off. For example,
Okay.
a lot of employees will not tell their employers that they're giving care to aging loved ones because there's some sort of stigma attached to that, almost as though you didn't make a good plan. When in fact, how can we plan for an Alzheimer's diagnosis? How can we plan for a heart attack or something else that is completely unexpected and out of the blue? So things like paid time off are really important. Also, any program for working moms, such as flex time or remote work or hybrid work, any of those things are helpful. Also, coaching type programs that are offered through companies, whether they're voluntary or involuntary benefits, can be very, very helpful.
Yeah,
And
that's
also
true.
looking at the full gamut of what you are offering employees and making sure there's a caregiver component in there. So let's just take a retirement planning component, which many, many companies have. They want to help their employees get ready for retirement from the early stages, from even when the employee just gets started. Why not have a couple of hours there on planning for caregiving?
Yes, of course. That makes sense.
Right. And the importance of having long-term health care insurance so that you can actually fund the aging of your parents or loved ones. These things are really important and they can devastate employees at later points in their career when these things occur. And even now we know that a full quarter of the 53 million caregivers in America, just as a proxy for how many there are in the world, we have 53 million in America. A quarter of those are millennial aged.
Wow.
So we're having, remember, we had a lot of parents having their children at later ages about 20, 30 years ago. So now what we have are younger people being taxed with taking care of their older parents
Right.
because their parents were older to begin with.
Right.
So it's a pretty interesting phenomenon and it's happening worldwide. And I think it's something that companies are really going to need to take a look at because, again, 30% of your workforce is quite a big cut across all ages, genders, ethnicities, and pay grades.
I think that's very true. It's a very good point that you make because I've actually never heard anybody touch upon this. And of all the issues that come out and are being championed, nobody's really brought this to the fore. And yet, as you're pointing out here very clearly, it actually impacts a vast number of the workforce. And particularly, as you were saying, with parents of millennials who had these children later in life, they will have more of a caregiver response. It's more probable that they will have caregiver responsibilities than perhaps younger generations, right? Boomers or people like that.
Yes. Well, it's a pretty interesting challenge that has been going on for years now, but we've, of course, now got a spotlight on it. So that's been a little bit of a blessing from the pandemic because I think awareness is a very, very important aspect of leadership.
Yeah, it's the first step. I mean, you first have to become aware of the problem, right? Before you can
Yes.
set out to try to do something about it. But I think,
Yes.
with your point about how this is going to impact so many people potentially, a company that has programs like this in place, in a sense, from attracting employees, it's a competitive advantage. I think
Absolutely.
it's more than just saying we have good, maternity benefits or childcare benefits, to be able to say to people, we're providing this total package because life is more than just, the early years. I think
Yes.
that's quite interesting.
Well, it is a trend in human resources to be looking at the life stages of your employees.
Okay.
So it's not just the early stages, but also the late stages, and supporting your employees throughout those life stages.
We're going to take a quick break now, and then we'll be right back.
We were hiring when we were making 50 to 100K monthly losses.
And why? Welcome to episode 1.
I can't think of a single founder who's been around for a decent amount of time in business who hasn't had their tunnel of year. This was that year. We're going to be okay, yeah, Sheree. Some are going to hear this and think you TDP, but hear me out. You only have to do the math to understand that very soon we were $500,000 down.
Yeah. Well, you're right. The pandemic brought a lot of things to light for people, and it made us realize how vulnerable we can be. So you never know what's going to happen next with all kinds of things. We're hoping that we'll be looking at the back of this pandemic soon and things will be a little more calm.
We certainly can hope so. Yes, it's true. And it has shown us our vulnerability. Absolutely. And I think that gets us into this topic of leadership and taking a leadership role in your own life, because
right.
we're all probably more vulnerable than we think.
Right.
We might not have felt it so much before, but I think I hate bringing up the pandemic so much because I'm so tired of talking about it, honestly. But it has shown us all many, many things that are valuable. And I think one of the things is this sheer vulnerability that we do have as individuals. And also it has caused us, I believe, at least it's caused me to look at the way I do things again and think about how I'm going to do them again.
Right.
How am I going to carry myself through this situation? And I think that's a really, really important thing for all of us to keep in mind. In whether you're leading a business, whenever you're running a business, how am I carrying myself? How am I going to see myself through this situation? And where do I want to be at the other end?
I think that's a really good point, because I don't think people approach it in that way. Oftentimes, because when you're in the midst of the chaos, you're just trying to fight your way out of it and stay alive. But you're right. If you're able to calm down and look at things and try to figure out, okay, where am I now? Where do I want to be? What steps could I potentially take to get there? You have some kind of direction. And that's in some ways easier to take in business, because we're used to looking at business situations from that point of view. We're not used to looking at personal or emotional things from that point of view.
And especially as business people, we don't often get into that emotional terrain. We don't need to.
Yes.
We haven't needed to before this.
Yeah.
But nowadays we really, and perhaps it was happening anyway, because we were already hearing in business more about the importance of emotional intelligence,
right.
For example. That was a buzzword before COVID. Right. And I think we all intuitively know that leaders who are emotionally in tune with themselves and their values do better at leading others.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that we hadn't thought about that before. Nobody thought about the emotional side, the human side of leadership, right?
Yes.
And that's sort of come to light perhaps over a few decades, right? That we've sort of been taking, I don't know what you might call the soft side of leadership. I don't think I'm using the best way to explain it, but you think of it from that point of view, right?
Yes.
Less about systems and more about understanding people and being able to pull people together to work cohesively despite other potentially conflicting things.
Yes, it's a very important aspect of leadership, and I think it may have been a little bit neglected over the years, but I think now it's become an imperative, because We have people, employees who are struggling with their own lives. And if we have no empathy for that, then how can we be good leaders?
Yeah, I would agree. I think that in a sense, and maybe this is not the role that companies see themselves in, but companies, by supporting people through things that are emotional in nature, can make a huge impact on the community or on society, because you have a lot of people who are on the raw and ragged edge for one reason or another. And if they can find that kind of support through the workplace, that could actually be very, very impactful beyond the workplace.
Absolutely. And I think it can instill much loyalty in your employees. To be understood is a very important human need. And so if one can feel that, then I believe one would be more loyal, for sure.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And it's something that people haven't really looked at, because it's intuitively, you wouldn't think of that as being part, right, of running a successful company. But it actually has a very big impact.
It really does.
Debbie, it's just been great talking to you. And how can people connect with you? I think a lot of people are going to want to reach out to you, certainly to be able to have access to your book, perhaps to be able to connect with you. What's the best way for people to reach you?
Well, you can visit www.thecaregivingjourney.com. That's all run together, no caps. Or for the business side and view of the caregiving situation, www.thecaregivingcrisis.com. So I have two books, Jane. One is for individuals, the caregiving journey, information, guidance, and inspiration. And that tells you all about planning and surviving and thriving and relaunching your life when your caregiving is done. And then for businesses, that book is coming out in January of 2022. And that's called The Caregiving Crisis, What It Cost Your Business and How to Fix It. And that's all about the steps you can take as a company to become more aware, identify your caregiving employees, and create a caregiver-friendly culture.
Wow, well, that's a must read. So I'll put all of this in the show notes so that people will be able to get the exact web address and have the exact title of the book and so forth. But I want to thank you again for taking the time to join us today. It's just been a pleasure.
Well, thank you so much, Jane. I really appreciate you having me on. And yeah, let's talk again.
Absolutely. If you enjoyed this episode of A Seat at the Table, join me each week when I sit down with industry leaders, innovators, entrepreneurs, and authors who share their expertise, experience, and insights about succeeding in business and in life. And don't forget to check out our podcast website, where you can find all of the previous episodes of the Seat at the Table podcast, the show notes, news about our upcoming masterclass series, and lots of other useful information. You can find it at seat.fm. That's www.seat.fm. FM because it's a podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Jane Singer, and I'll see you in the next podcast episode.